Superb.
Greetings, Saberites. Nonymous here. So our recent videos on Makashi and the Dulon have reignited a particular debate or a particular discussion which we've had a couple of times in our history here on the channel and in the world. And that is, does Count Dooku in the movies use a fencing type style? A lot of people take issue with our Makashi since the form is based on some Chinese stuff. We kind of see everything as very universal, so we've based everything on universal principles. Hopefully people won't get hung up too much on particular aesthetics here and there. But the issue is as it is portrayed in the movies, does Makashi orient with fencing? Does it orient with what have you? So we have to kind of go into it. The thing about it is, and we always say this, is that if you look at the movies of Count Dooku, not the cartoon. So if you take the movies and look at how he's using the lightsaber, which we'll do here in a second, that there's really nothing that resembles fencing in there. It's very kendo-ish. It's quite hack slash turn, all that kind of thing. We don't see pretty much anything like that. Now, if you're talking about, say, the cartoon, then okay, now you've got a point. They did a very good job of trying to get a kind of fencing, or at least a very rapier-ish, or small sword-ish type of look to Dooku's fencing or combat. So, yes, in the Clone Wars, you definitely have a point. It definitely looks like what it said in the article, which is it was kind of based on a line and fencing and stuff like that. So yes, I get it. As things are applied, I think they start to look more and more like what people consider fencing or rapier type combat, but we'll get into that later. Now, if we take the movies here and we just look very carefully at what he's doing. We'll take Attack of the Clones here first. So the opening salvo of Attack of the Clones, with Obi-Wan rushing in and engaging Count Dooku here, sees Dooku holding his saber after the initial salute with two hands, quite clearly, right? As the fight moves on, and we'll go here in slow motion, so you can see every little detail. None of this, as you see, isn't very reminiscent of fencing, and he doesn't even let go with his other hand. So there's really no one-handed sword play in here anyway, regardless of whether you call it Western fencing or what have you. So Attack of the Clones, and we can move on here to the other scenes here. If we have Anakin and Dooku, we have the same thing, right? We have high stances or high guards with two hands held up high, hands there. Quite frankly, Anakin's doing more of that type of fencing because he's got two sabers. But again, looking at that type of fencing, or looking at what the choreography is doing there, there is not a lot which you could argue is very, very fencing-ish. even when we flip over to the Yoda fight, or the Mad Gummy Bear fight, as I sometimes tend to write it as. But even with an opponent like Yoda, who's jumping all around, as we see here, he is still doing basic turning, strikes, holding onto it with two hands, going through the air. Now, in this part of the fight, there are some scenes where he does let go when you have a close-up of Christopher Lee. Now, that's usually done, as you see here, in kind of... you don't see his lower body, and you don't see anything else in the environment. So it's very isolated. And those are probably the only things that you can really interpret as a fencing type of thing. So Attack of the Clones, we don't see a whole lot of that stuff in there. All right, moving on to Revenge of the Sith. Here, there seems to be a concerted effort upon the choreographer, or at least some of the fighters or athletes that are being used in the fight, to have Dooku use one hand. And that's probably on purpose because of this whole thing. Now, we have to remember, before we go on, that the forms were sort of, I believe they came out after Attack of the Clones, right, to kind of, and in response almost to Dooku. I'll look that up there. But that's whatever it is, the forms have nothing to do with what was done in the movies. And Nick Gilliard has said many, many times that he doesn't understand the forms, the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. He doesn't like them, and he never uses them. So there's that. We'll check in with him too, because he has another thing to say about that. Anyway, as we go through here, he's using more of one hand here, but still, the type of things that he is doing are very slash-oriented. They're very what we would kind of, and they're not really even that Western saber-ish, right? They're very, I hate to say it, very kendo-like. But that's what is going on there, as you can plainly see. So when you look at the fights and you look at what was being done in there, and yes, in Revenge of the Sith, he does let go of the saber a few times, but he holds on to it a lot of times too. And the types of blocks and parries that he's doing are much more reminiscent of, say, kendo or katana-based system than a rapier or small swordish type system. So there's that. Finally, when we say that he's fighting with kendo, we're not the ones who are really making that claim. Nick Gilliard will say it himself.
The fight with Anakin and Dooku is kendo. Dooku goes straight into a kendo pose, and we just turned Anakin.
So, to sum up, when you look at the movie portrayals of Count Dooku, Kyle Rawlings is the guy who's actually doing most of the swordplay, and it cuts, of course, to Christopher Lee. You see that it's really based on kendo. We have that information from Nick Gilliard, who did the whole choreographies for the movies, and then just looking at it, we don't see any of the characteristic fencing maneuvers. We see no lunges, 0, right? And that is probably one of the big staples of both saber fencing, epee, foil, all of that is the long lunge, coming in, staying on the line, all of that kind of thing. Even in the Clone Wars, you see that he regularly will do two-handed assists. He will go into other blocks, which are far more close to the body than usually in fencing. So even in the Clone Wars, he doesn't really do fencing. It's much closer to, well, kind of what we do, which is a mixture between weapons. You can see that in pretty much anything. If you look at a saber fencing or sport fencing duel, even a historical fencing duel with sabers, military sabers and stuff, it's not going to resemble anything that you see in the movies. And that's just because it's not based on it at all. There is no there. Now, they may have given some stylistic flourishes here or there to Christopher Lee in the direction to give that kind of air, but really the Jedi arts, as we see them in the movies, are fairly set. They're very, very similar. So, there you go. Can't see the fencing in it, and as you can see here, we just don't see any of the characteristic marks of a fencing style there. So, while it is great storytelling and gives Dooku some character and stuff like that, we haven't really seen it be portrayed very well in live action. Even in the Clone Wars, he doesn't stick to fencing. It seems a lot more like it. And there are some lunges and all that kind of stuff in there. But we have the same stuff. So, as we go forward, let's try to keep our minds on the idea that these are fictional styles. They've all been made up. We're all gathering things from reality and real martial arts. And there are things a lot of things in the canon, as it were, that just are not going to work in real life. And not because they deal with magic, but it's just because that's just not the way martial arts, especially martial arts with weapons, works. So, there we go. And again, it's not really about lightsabers or weapons. It's about the storytelling. All right. So, hopefully that will clear up. I doubt that will stop the debate, but we will continue it. Please join us on the Learners in Exile forum if you'd like to voice your opinion, or you can do it here in the comments, although it's very hard to keep up with comments on YouTube, not a great place for discussion. So please share it with your friends. Let's hear what you have to say. We're not necessarily the authority on this. We're just kind of putting out there what we have found. All right. So, that's all I have for today. Until next time, happy sabering.
Get help, you're no match for him. He's a Sith Lord.
Chancellor Palpatine, Sith Lords are our speciality.